Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. James Franklin, Penn State, doing a really nice job in the transfer portal. And they're not necessarily the headline program in terms of bringing in 20-plus guys through the portal. But when you recruit out of high school like James Franklin does, you really don't need to go out and add 20-plus players in the transfer portal. But the quality of players and the upside that these players have that are coming into this Penn State roster, really, really exciting, landing two cornerbacks that I want to talk about. And then more importantly, take a bird's eye view of what Penn State has done in the transfer portal and talk about a few other positions we would want to see them address. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. It has been a blast breaking down these commitments from the transfer portal the last couple of weeks. We hopped on, talked about Julian Fleming last week. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear how Penn State fans are feeling about what Penn State has done in the offseason, not just in the transfer portal, but bringing in a new offensive coordinator and Coach Koldnicki. I've been very vocal about how excited I am to see this Penn State offense. A lot of offseason changes that James Franklin has made that I think are going to help Penn State close the gap in the Big Ten. And if you remember a couple of years prior to Jim Harbaugh having all this success, Jim Harbaugh was in a very similar place, right? Banging his head against the ceiling of Ohio State in the Big Ten. What did he do during that 2020 and 2021 offseason? Completely revamp the coaching staff, bring some players in through the portal, and that helped Michigan. You're kind of seeing Penn State go through this process as well. I want to talk about AJ Harris, Jalen Kimber, and kind of do a little recap about what Penn State has done in the portal. Now, starting with AJ Harris, what excites me most about AJ, the upside that AJ Harris has is immense. And there was a reason that when he hit the transfer portal coming from Georgia, this was a guy that was sought after by most Power 5 programs. Now, as a true freshman at Georgia, didn't play a ton of football, but that is not indicative of AJ Harris as a football player. And you look at that Georgia secondary room, both their boundary cornerbacks are going to be NFL guys. In the safety room, they had two NFL players there. It was just a loaded secondary room that was hard to find snaps if you were going to be a true freshman for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2023. And that kind of was what AJ Harris dealt with. Now, when he did play for Georgia, you saw that he's a very good football player. And coming out of high school, was a top 30 national prospect and largely a box checker. From a physical standpoint, there's not much that AJ Harris doesn't possess in terms of being an all-conference cornerback in the Big Ten. He's an extremely big and physical cornerback, at 6'1", 190 pounds, a guy that wants to put his hands on opposing receivers, jam them at the line of scrimmage. But when you talk about cornerbacks and what you want to evaluate, you're really looking for two things. One, the size, right? Can you have the size and physicality to deal with some of those bigger boundary cornerbacks that you're going to see at the top of the college football level? AJ Harris certainly has that. But the next thing you're looking for is that long speed. And AJ Harris, coming out of high school, had a track background. So when you combine the size and the physicality that AJ Harris has, combined with the long speed, the ability to run with wide receivers down the field, that's what you're really getting in a guy like AJ Harris. And he's an extremely fluid athlete. Like a lot of times you see these bigger boundary cornerbacks. Yeah, they're big. They got that physicality. They can run in a straight line. They're linear athletes. Do they have the ability to mirror wide receivers, change direction, and kind of break on footballs? AJ Harris has that too. Again, a reason why he's a top 10 prospect in the transfer portal and was a top 30 prospect coming out of the 2023 class. He's extremely physically gifted. Now, Penn State doing some work in the cornerback room, landing another commitment who was previously committed to Louisville, commits to Penn State, and another former top 100 national prospect who was actually at the University of Georgia. Then he goes to Florida for a couple years. Now he's coming back to Penn State, and you look at Jalen Kimber. This is a guy that has what AJ Harris has in physical traits but lacks in experience. Jalen Kimber has in experience, right? He's not necessarily as physical as a guy like AJ Harris, but he has that length. He has that athleticism. Again, a top 100 prospect coming out of his high school recruiting class, and has played a lot of football at the SEC level, right? Faced 35 targets, only gave up 20 catches last year, 7 forced incompletions, played over 480 snaps for the Florida Gators in 2023. You're getting two cornerbacks that I think both, what excites me most is the high upside that they have. Like two guys that were really sought after coming out of high school for a reason. And Jalen Kimber was sought after coming out of the transfer portal as well, right? Committed to Louisville. Texas A&M made a big push. Penn State able to come in late and close the deal. AJ Harris, Jalen Kimber, wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about two really good starting cornerbacks for the Penn State Nittany Lions in 2024. And I want to take a look at what Penn State has done in the transfer portal thus far. And again, it's not going to be the biggest class because you look at Penn State and what they have coming back. They have a lot of things that you're excited about. But I want to go back to Julian Fleming really quickly because this was probably the biggest position that you wanted to see Penn State address, right? The wide receiver play for Penn State in 2023 was simply not good enough. I mean, the offensive scheme wasn't good. I think the wide receiver play wasn't good. And quite frankly, I think a lot of Penn State fans would agree the quarterback play wasn't good. But if you want to build around Drew Aller, a guy that if you're going to break through, it's because Drew kind of puts it together. We know physically Drew has the arm talent. He has the body to be an elite college football quarterback. There was a reason he was a 5-star coming out of high school. I think he was not in the best situation in 2023, right? His top targets were his tight ends and running backs. You really didn't have wide receivers making plays for him down the field. And I think that offensive scheme under Coach Yurasek wasn't that good, right? It felt like it was very condensed. It didn't seem like there was a lot of space to operate within that offense. That's going to change with Coach Koldenicki. Like, what is the main thing that Andy Koldenicki is bringing to Kansas is an explosive offense that average was a top 10 offense in terms of yards per play, top 10 offense and yards per pass, in a offense that is going to have his guys operate in space, but you needed the playmakers to match what you wanted to do from a schematic standpoint. And a guy, and a guy like Julian Fleming, again, kind of a similar conversation we talked about with AJ Harris, where Julian Fleming, not as productive as many would have thought coming out of high school as being a top 5 national prospect, but a guy that was just buried in an Ohio State wide receiver room that had multiple first-round NFL guys, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., a loaded Ohio State wide receiver room. So again, the reason Julian Fleming wasn't a wide receiver one for Ohio State, I don't think, was because he's not good enough to be that guy. I think he was just kind of buried in the depth chart. And I think Julian Fleming coming to Penn State is clearly the wide receiver one for this offense. So that really excites me. Another guy that I think kind of flew under the radar is Nolan Rucci coming from Wisconsin. And this guy was a 5-star coming out of high school. Penn State made a run at him coming out of high school. Goes to Wisconsin and just hasn't put it together yet, right? He's only played 78 snaps for a Wisconsin team that has some really quality guys on the offensive line. I think at Penn State, you're most excited for is what if Nolan Rucci kind of reaches that potential? Because the potential of Nolan Rucci and him putting it together is an all-conference offensive tackle. And I think that's what you're largely saying with these guys that they've brought in, right? AJ Harris, the potential to be an all-Big Ten cornerback. Julian Fleming, the potential to be an all-Big Ten wide receiver. And Nolan Rucci, I think you can say the exact same thing for, and Jalen Kimber. I mean, a lot of guys that have the physical traits and might just benefit from a little bit of a change of scenery. So I'm really excited to see if Penn State can kind of hit on some of these guys in the portal, right? Last cycle, Penn State just didn't do a very good job, right? Bringing in guys like McClain or Dante Cephas, solid football players, but I think a lot of Penn State fans would say they missed in the transfer portal. You got a lot of guys that could really put it together and be quality football players for Penn State. I'm a big fan of what James Franklin is doing in terms of balancing using the portal to kind of get experienced guys and, again, high upside guys, but also marrying that with really, really good high school classes. This is a depth chart that is in a really healthy spot. And you look at the Big Ten with Oregon, Washington coming in. I mean, Michigan looks like, and again, many of you guys know I'm a Michigan fan, looks like they're going to lose a lot of what that team was in 2023. Ohio State, this is probably the weakest we've seen them as a program in a very long time. And Penn State has a ton of young talent that is running it back in 2024. So this is a year that if the OC hire works and Coach Koldenicki, you hit on some of these guys in the portal, Drew Aller takes that step. If you're a Penn State fan, you're looking at 2024 as maybe a season that Penn State breaks through. And I think they're doing what they need to do in terms of bringing in coaches. I think they're doing what they need to do in terms of bringing in talent in the portal. And we'll see if Penn State can put it together in 2024. Excited about the class. Excited about the offseason moves in general for James Franklin in this Penn State program. Wanted to hop on, talk a little bit about it again. Appreciate you guys. There has been a ton of support over the last couple of weeks as we've broken down these commitments. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.